Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of the Triangle Area SQL Server User Group's Business Intelligence and Data Science meeting. And for this evening, actually the fourth Tuesday in August. It's so weird how it's the fourth Tuesday, and yet it's the Business Intelligence and Data Science meeting. It's almost like we do that every month. We have the distinct pleasure of James D. Bartlett III, who is going to talk to us about PowerShell hacks for Power BI. So, James, please take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, I'm James Bartlett, and I'll be talking with you today about some tricks you can use with PowerShell to be a more efficient Power BI tenant administrator, to help with Power BI data gateway administration, to back up your reports, and stuff like that. So we're going to be kind of running the gamut of some stuff that's really hyper technical and some other stuff that is a little more kind of user friendly or maybe user oriented stuff. And of course, feel free to ask questions throughout. I've asked Kevin to kind of moderate the questions, so I won't be seeing them myself, but he'll be able to cut in when there's a question that is relevant to the conversation. So without any further ado, let's get going here. Anybody who wants to find me online, oh, can everybody see the screen here? Are we good to go still?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, cool. Anybody wants to find me on my website is datavolume.xyz. It's a play on words, X, Y, and Z being the three-dimensional coordinates that you need to compute volume. And then I'm on Mastodon at James D. Bartlett III at techhub.social. And let's get going here. So for starters, we're going to do getting the data gateway nodes status. So I'm assuming most people here know what an on-prem data gateway is for Power BI. Microsoft releases an update for this software every month, and it can, depending on how many nodes or how many clusters you have in your organization, it might be kind of hard to keep track of whether all of your nodes have the latest version of that software running. So I actually have a script that you can run to basically query all of your data gateways and check to see if all of them are up to date. So let's go ahead and switch over to VS Code for that. First, before we can actually run that function, I have to import all of the scripts that we're going to be working today. And I have this little helper script here that imports the specific functions that we're going to be demoing. So I'm just going to quick run that here. So now I should be able to run any of these functions right here in the terminal. So what I'm going to start with is get data gateway nodes status. And what it's going to do is it's going to, of course, I believe it will need me to log in first. So it asked me to get an authentication token. So I'm just going to do that real quick here. And of course, once we've finished authenticating in the browser, we can switch back over to VS Code. And here we are. So we can see here's the ID of the cluster. Here's the cluster name, then the node. This is a demo machine that I'm using here. This is just a VM that I spun up. And so there's just the one gateway in this test tenant. But in a larger organization, as long as you have the permission to see all of the nodes, or I guess more correctly, this script will show you the status of all the nodes to which you have access. So if you're the global tenant administrator, you should see everything. If you're a sort of an administrator over only a certain portion of the organization, then you'll see only the nodes that are relevant to your portion of the organization. So as we can see here, it shows update available, and I kind of did this on purpose. I left the previous version of the data gateway installed on this machine, so you can actually see there's another thing we're going to be doing here where I have some PowerShell that will help you streamline the process of updating the data gateway software on your data gateway servers whenever you need to do that. So now that I've identified that there's an update available for this, I'm going to take the code that I've got, and this is a repository on GitHub. It's called PowerBits. And let me switch over to my browser for a moment. I will show you where to find that. So it's github.com/James D. Bartlett 3/PowerBits. And so the code I'm about to be running here is under PowerShell. And then there's this folder called Enterprise Data Gateway. So we have a couple of link files and a PowerShell, a PS1 PowerShell script. And I'll show you how you set that up on your local machine to make this work. So I basically copy that enterprise data gateway folder and paste it into the C drive. So your total your directory is C:\enterprise data gateway, and I've actually added another folder in here. This is not part of the what's done in the repo, but these link files are actually linked to, one of them goes to the enterprise data gateway configurator. So once you've finished installing the latest version, this opens up the configurator so you can log in on that data gateway, and that will make sure that the that will give you the once you've logged in, then it will register as having the latest version installed. So this one here, you'll actually need to go into the properties on this file, and under the compatibility section, you'll want to say run this program as administrator. And when you do that, that makes sure that when you double click this file, that it actually prompts you. You all probably can't see my, or maybe you can, I don't know, since this is a VM, but it should prompt you to log in as admin, and then it will run the PowerShell script here. So it says upgrading enterprise data gateway on this server to latest version, press any key to continue. I'm going to look around for the any key. That's a old school joke for those of you out there. All right, so now I'm going to basically use my my administrator account to log in. And what it's done now is it's authenticated, and it's now downloading the installer for the latest version of the data gateway. This will take a little bit. So let's see here. I think I might as well go and I guess I can show you what the actual contents of this. So all it does is it starts up. Now this does require the data gateway PowerShell module. So if you don't have that installed, you need to install it first. Of course, you can always just any PowerShell modules that you need. You can always install them under the current user scope. So you don't have to have admin rights on the machine that you're on. You can just install it in the scope of basically your user profile in PowerShell. So it just starts in, here, this is the stuff we already saw. It's saying, and then this is waiting for you to press the any key. It logs in using login data gateway service account, and then it does install -data gateway accept conditions. So that basically skips the whole, like, do you want to, accept these conditions? I don't know if that's a problem. I hope it's not a problem for anyone. And then finally, at the end, what it does is it says start process, and then it goes to, and it basically goes to your on-premises data gateway and runs that. So it looks like it finished the download, so it's starting the installation. Anybody have any questions so far?
So there are no questions so far, but if there are any questions,
Okay.
get them in chat and I'll pass them along.
I guess we could ask how everyone feels about the font size. This is I blew it up to about as big as I could get it while still fitting most of the stuff I need to be able to have on the screen. So I'm hoping that this is big enough for everyone, but of course, let me know if anybody's having a hard time reading anything. And this is, I don't have Zoom It on this machine, so that is not an option, unfortunately. Okay, I guess we'll just let that run for a little bit here. I'll pop over to here and we'll say, all right, so we're currently doing the upgrade on-prem data gateway with PowerShell. I guess we'll begin looking at the code for the next bit here, which is copy Power BI report content to blank PBIX file. So I'm wondering whether anyone here remembers how it used to be that if you authored a report in the Power BI service, you basically couldn't ever download that file as a PBIX. That capability has been added, but there's still some limitations on whether you can download a PBIX file. One of the things that I've noticed is that anytime you've got a report that's been authored in a person's My Workspace, it's basically stuck there. Of course, we can now grant, if you're a tenant administrator, you can grant yourself permissions to view someone else's personal My Workspace in Power BI, but that still doesn't give you the ability to download the PBIX file if they didn't author it in Power BI Desktop originally. So with this copy Power BI report content to blank PBIX file, what this actually does is it gives us the ability to it's utilizing a little known feature in a Power BI REST API to basically copy the content from one report into another report file. And so the idea is, of course, the only reason why you couldn't download that report if it was authored in the web service is that it wasn't authored in Power BI Desktop. So if you take a blank PBIX file and you publish that to the same workspace, then you invoke this Power BI REST API and say, okay, let's just copy the content from the web authored report into the desktop authored report, which was blank. So there's nothing that needs to be saved from there. Then that becomes a file that you can download as a PBIX, and then you can start working on it in Power BI Desktop. So this is a way to kind of rescue a report that maybe somebody's put a lot of time and effort into developing in their personal My Workspace, and then they're kind of realizing, well, I want to share this with other people in the organization, but they're sort of hit a dead end because they didn't actually publish it ever to a they weren't working in Power BI Desktop, and they didn't have it in a traditional workspace. So, oh, looks like my script finished. So before we continue there, we'll finish this. So it says my gateway is all set up. So now it shows that I'm running the latest version of this data gateway. So I think I ought to be able to sign in, and then I need to use the, let's see here, data gateway. I have a special service account just for this purpose. I'm going to paste that in here, and I'm going to, this is another little thing. A lot of people are like, man, I don't want to have to keep typing the password in. You can save your password in your default browser if it's a big pain in the tush. So you can, if you add that there, then when it launches in your browser, hopefully I actually saved the password for this account here. And well, looks like I didn't. So anyway, if this were to log in, then I would be able to go run this, and then instead of update available, it would say latest. So I guess I'll have to figure that out for next time. All right. Any questions on any of that before I continue?
Looks like no questions so far.
Awesome. All right. So moving on to the copy Power BI report content to blank PBIX file. So this function does a whole lot of things here. So I'm actually going to, let's see if I can minimize this terminal, get that out of the way, and get that out of the way. All right. So bunch of parameters here. You're going to have source report ID, source workspace ID, target report ID, and if you don't specify a target workspace, it will just use the same workspace as the source report. And then you can either specify a blank PBIX file if you happen to have one lying around. If you don't specify one, then this the script will automatically go and download one from the GitHub repo here. And then you can also specify the out file, so basically the destination for when you want to download that PBIX file for your own use later on. So I won't get too much into the details here, but basically this is checking to make sure that the blank, if you have specified or provided your own blank PBIX file, this is making sure that it's actually a valid PBIX file before it tries to use it. And some checking here to make sure that everything that your local file exists. And so we're gonna go down here. Of course, if you didn't specify a blank PBIX file locally, this is where it's going to go download the blank PBIX file for you. And all right, down here, this is where the actual action starts happening. So of course, we have to get the access token for Power BI. So if this, of course, this is the try catch finally pattern that people will see oftentimes in PowerShell, where what it's doing here is trying this first. If this returns an error, then it runs this catch section here. So if there's already an active Power BI session, what this is doing is getting the access token from that active session so that you don't always have to authenticate every single time you run a new script. So if you run one script from this family of scripts that I've got in here, as long as you keep that same PowerShell window open, then your session will stay active, and then all the scripts you run after that, you won't actually have to log in every time, because it'll just get a new bearer token every time from that same session. So down here it says we're going to basically take that, all the information you passed in about the target report and the destination, all that stuff, and it's going to call a REST API. This is that update report content and that is the actual that's the actual endpoint, the REST API endpoint that we're going to call in Power BI, and then it passes. Here's the body that it posts. I think, is it a post? Yes, it's a post. Here's the body of that REST API call, and it puts the source report ID and the source workspace ID. And here's of course, your headers. And then the response, this is where basically it's going to invoke the REST method and basically put all those variables that we declared here together. And down here, it's going to get the Power BI report name. So because you want to know, or it wants to know how it should name the PBIX file before it downloads it. Now it's going to take that out file and it's going to add this _clone.pbix to the end of the file name, just so that you know that that's the one that you cloned it to. Otherwise, if you specified an out file name, then it will just be whatever you decided to name it. So, and then it exports the target report to a PBIX file locally. And all right. So, and then finally, of course, you don't want to leave that extra report that you've created there in the service. You really only wanted it there so you could download it. So after we're done with that, this basically cleans up after itself. All right. So why don't we go ahead and run this? I'm going to go to I'm going to go up to Power BI here, and I'm going to go to one of my workspaces. And let's say that I want to, let's go for this report here. And I'm just going to grab, so this is the workspace ID. So the part right after the word groups in the URL, that's your workspace ID. And then the part right after the word reports, that's your report ID. And so those are what we're going to need for this command. So we're going to go back over to VS Code here. I'm going to open up my terminal again. And all right, so I'm going to run, this is copy, oops, Power BI report content to blank PBIX file. So I'm going to say, all right, so I need the source report ID, and I'll back over here. That's this guy. Oops. Here we go. Copy that. Paste it here. All right. And then, oops. I need my next one, which is going to be source workspace ID. And that is this workspace here. All right. Now, some of these parameters are optional. In fact, it's just these two that are mandatory. Everything else is not mandatory. So I'm actually just going to run it as it is, because everything else is, I don't really need to specify it. But here we go. So it's going and making the request. Oh, looks like my VM has expired. I'm going to need to spin me up a new VM. All right, maybe I didn't make enough sacrifices to demo gods this morning. Or it looks like my terminal froze, actually. Okay. All right. Start this again. Uh-oh. Oh, that's fun. All right. I guess we'll do this the old-fashioned way. So I'm going to go back to my PowerBits, and this is my this is going to be under PowerShell here. I'm going to just open my terminal from here. All right. So first of all, I need to dot source my import functions so that I can use those. Okay, so copy Power BI report content. Okay, and then we're going to do. Oh boy, I need to do this all over again, don't I? You know, I wish that terminal would stay open. Here. Nope. Well, that's lovely. Okay, so I guess I'll do source report ID and do this all over again. Anybody have any questions while we're muddling along with this?
So far, no questions, but
Okay.
this is a really good time if you got any so far. As we vamp for a little bit to let James get back into position.
Source report ID, source workspace ID. Boop, boop, boop. All right, let's try that. Aha, there we go. Access token required. It's launching the browser. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log in. Let's see here. This one, I can use this account. Okay, it has acquired the access token. All right. There we go. Was that it? Let's see. Oh, check it out. There's a PBIX file here that wasn't there before. Let's see if that's the file that I wanted. Looks like it has content in it, so that's a good sign. All right. Now, of course, when you're downloading a report like this, this now doesn't have a data connection anymore. This is just the report file. So you're not getting the data set. It's just the report part. So you would need to re-add the data connection. So you can do that by doing a get data, and then when you just tell it to connect to the Power BI data set that that report was originally connected to, and then all of these visuals will come to life again. All right, so we'll go ahead and kill that here. Moving on, export Power BI reports from workspaces. This is a way that you can, if you are either a tenant administrator or someone who has a lot of reports under your jurisdiction, and you need to be able to back them all up on a regular basis, or even if you're just, hey, we're starting version control, we're going to put all of our reports in Git or GitHub or in Azure DevOps or wherever you want to do that, but we need to be able to download them all first so we can throw them in a repository and then start committing them there. Normally, you don't want to have to go through and just right-click, download this file, wait for the Power BI web service to catch up with you. Of course, that, anytime you can avoid doing a bunch of manual labor, that's it's good to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this export Power BI reports from workspaces. So again, we got some parameters here. We have output folder, extract with PBI Tools. Those of you who are not familiar, I'll actually show you real quick. PBI Tools is a third-party tool from Matthias Tierbach, originally from Germany, now lives in the UK. He's actually been partnering with Microsoft for the latest versions of Power BI Desktop, where they support this new version of the PBIX file that has what's called a tabular model definition language inside, rather than the older version where the definition language was kind of jumbled. It was really hard to read, and it was hard to edit by hand. This new version with Power BI Desktop, if you save it as a .pbip file rather than a PBIX file, it will actually save all of the source code for your report and its data set in these little folders. And so anyway, this PBI Tools basically takes a PBIX file and turns it into source code. And then you can commit that source code to your to your version control system, whether it's GitHub or Azure DevOps, what have you. So we're going to one of the things that this script does is it gives you the option to automatically, once it's finished downloading a report, have it extract the source code from that report and basically just put it in a folder adjacent to where that file is saved, and then have that folder be named the same as whatever that report, that PBIX file is named, minus the .PBIX at the end. So we'll see what that looks like here in a moment. Throttle limit, this is basically the ability for this script to run in parallel. So to have it be able to run, to download and extract multiple PBIX files at once. The default is 1, so that it's only running one at a time. I usually run it with however many processor cores I have on the system. So, all right. So there's a function in here which is to convert a PBIX file to a project folder, which this uses the PBI Tools command. Of course, it has to be in your path for that to work. And if you need instructions on that, on my website here, I actually have an article that I wrote on my blog for an external tool that I'll be demoing here at the end. But there's instructions in here about how to get that working. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. At least I thought I had that in here. Well, anyway, if you need instructions on that, they're available from the PBI Tools website. All right, so we'll continue here. Again, same thing. It's going to log in. There's a lot of the scripts you'll find in here. I've got some ignore workspaces and ignore reports. A lot of these are just lists where it's like I've gone and put some restrictions in to say I don't actually want to see certain workspaces or certain reports. Ones where a lot of these are just ones that Microsoft puts in, by default. They are like they're part of the PowerBI tenant administration, that kind of stuff, or the automatically generated reports. Some of these are template apps, like you might get either from the template app store, or that sort of stuff. So I just got that in there because those aren't really the kind of thing that you want to be able to back up, because most of the time you didn't author them in the first place, and they're just always going to be there. So it's not like you're going to lose them. All right. So, all right, we'll continue on here. So this is basically one thing we'll notice here. There's this thing called out console grid view. So this is the ability for you to, when this thing runs, it's going to actually find a list of all the workspaces in your tenant, and then this will give you the option of which workspaces you want to export at a time. So for smaller tenants, yeah, you can probably run it for all your workspaces at once. It's no big deal. But for, any organization that's larger, you're going to have enough workspaces that you'll end up starting to hit your query limits for the REST APIs. And you don't want to run into a situation where your script is timing out and failing in the middle of it. So this gives you the ability to kind of do them in batches if you want. So that requirement shows right up here where it says requires this console GUI tools. This is a module you'll need installed first before that part will work. All right. So moving on down here, of course, again, you can specify a target directory if you want. By default, it's just going to dump it in your temp folder. And when the process starts running, it's actually going to open that temp folder in your file explorer for you, so you don't have to go try to find it somewhere. And then what this is doing here is it's going to say, all right, for each of these workspaces that it finds, it's going to go ahead and enumerate the reports inside that workspace. And and then we've got some stuff in here for error logging and that sort of thing. There'll actually be an error log file that shows up in that folder to let you know if you had any reports that couldn't download for one reason or another. There are a few reasons why a report wouldn't be able to download with this, and those are the same reasons why you wouldn't be able to download the PBIX from the PowerBI web service using your browser. Things like if you've got incremental refresh turned on, then you can't download the PBIX file for that. If you've got if you have modified the data set using the XMLA endpoint, so tools like Tabular Editor, or ALM Toolkit, where you're basically going in and you're mucking around with the actual innards of the data set using the XMLA endpoint to do that. As soon as you've modified that file once, then that file can no longer be downloaded from the PowerBI service, and you'll get an error with that as well. Also, like I said before, in some certain circumstances, if the report was originally authored in the web service, then it won't be downloadable. So a few different reasons why you'll get an error there, but this will actually log all the errors that you didn't encounter. So if anytime that if you can go back and look at that error log and determine which ones you need to figure out another way to get to download. This also does support paginated reports. So doesn't matter if you're using the Canvas reports or interactive reports, or whether you're using paginated or the SSRS style reports. Doesn't matter. This will actually download all of them and put them all in there. As long as it's downloadable, it will download them for you. All right. So down here, let's see here. Oh, this is the part where it actually goes in parallel. So I wanted to point this out. So it takes this is your overall reports list, and then it says for each object, and then it does the throttle limit. So it takes that, if we specified a throttle limit, it will run up to that many in parallel at a time. And that's what this parallel here is doing. And then everything inside here, it's basically just going to run these, however many you've specified, it runs those at once. One limitation on the parallelism is that it can only run parallel within a single workspace at a time. So if you've got a workspace that has 100 reports in it, that's a really great option for parallelism, because it will do however many you specify for that entire workspace. However, if you have a bunch of workspaces where you only have 1 or 2 reports inside them, each one of those workspaces, the workspaces themselves can't be iterated in parallel. It's only the reports that can be run in parallel, at least in the current version of the script. Of course, this is open source, so if anybody wants to try to help me add that functionality, I would welcome any pull requests you would like to submit. So, all right, so this is going ahead and downloading the reports. It's using the export REST API endpoint. And of course, we're going to send here's the headers and the content type, all that stuff. And then it's of course doing the taking any errors that it encounters. It's going to go ahead and log those, and that's what this stuff down here is. And all right, a bunch of this stuff is basically just showing you the output of what's happening in real time in the terminal. So I'll go ahead and switch over to the terminal here, and we'll run that now. So I'm going to say export Power BI reports from workspaces, and I'm going to tell it extract with PBI Tools. I'm going to do a throttle limit of 4. So here we go. And you'll notice that because I already had an access token in my session, that it just skipped the authentication dialog, which is nice. All right, here we go. So here's all my workspaces that I have in the access to under this user. Of course, you'll only always see the workspaces that the user that used to log in has access to. So if you're the tenant administrator, you should see everything. But if you only have access to a certain workspaces, then you'll only see those workspaces. You can kind of use it in whatever role you are or you have in the organization. So this is that console GUI tools thing that I pointed out earlier. This one here, and it's used. Where is that? Right here, out console grid view. So it takes the workspaces and basically pipes that through here, so that you can say select which workspaces to export. This is kind of a nice thing, because you can actually use your mouse to select stuff or deselect. You can use your keyboard to move around, and of course to select or deselect, you're using the space key. And then there's these down here where you can say Control A to select all, Control D to select none, Enter to accept, or Escape to basically cancel out of it. So what and this is another nice thing here. So if you wanted to only show certain ones, so like if I wanted to show workspaces that started with BL, I can filter right there. So this is kind of a nice way to make sure that you're getting just the workspaces that you want for a given batch. So I'm gonna actually tell it that I want to do. I'm gonna tell it I want to do everything. So I'm going to go Control A, and I'm just going to deselect the data flows, because there's nothing in there that I can actually download. But I'll go ahead and run this. And in the terminal here, we're going to see, okay, here it's downloading these and extracting them. So I'm actually going to show over here. This is the in the temp folder. It does Power BI workspaces is where it drops them. So I'm just going to show here. It's got, and we just see that it encountered an error. So it shows that this report here is downloads disabled. So and that was the one that we did the that switcheroo on earlier, because normally it can't be downloaded, but we were able to use that that special script to be able to download a copy of it locally. All right, so looks like it's still going. So now look at that. Here's all of these report files, and so here is, here's these examples of here's this report, and then here is the folder that goes along with it. So inside this folder, we'll see here you have the model, the report, and all these other JSON files. And this is all stuff that you can commit to source control because it's all just text. The actual data is not included in this stuff here. So those of you familiar with Git, if you add star.pbix to your git ignore file, then you can put all of this stuff in your repository, and then when you go to commit, the PBIX files will just stay on your hard drive and they won't actually become part of your commits. But this part, the folders, will actually, the source code in the folders will be committed, and because it's JSON, you can actually see the difference between one version and the next. So if you run this script every so often, then you run a commit and you have it all in the same repo, then the next time you can say, okay, well, look at that. There's a change between the version that we had in the repository, and it looks like somebody published a newer version on the Power BI service. So this can be helpful for if you have a bunch of people in your organization who are report authors, but they're not savvy with Git, or they don't have the software on their machine or that sort of thing. So you can kind of take over that responsibility for them and keep everything in version control system. Of course, this is also useful for people in teams where if you're in a BI team and you and your teammates need to be able to keep your reports in a version control system. This allows you to kind of establish a baseline, and then from that point forward, everybody opens the PBIX file, and then I actually have another tool that I'll show you in a moment where you can actually run this same extraction process in real time while you're working in Power BI Desktop whenever you click the save button. So it looks like this actually finished. So here's all these files, and it dropped them in all of these folders. And here's my error log, so I can open this up and I can see, yeah, looks like that one report did fail to download, and it says because downloads are disabled. So, all right, so that's how that works. Any questions on that?
Looks like no questions at this time.
All right. I do want to point out one thing that's a bit of a limitation with this currently. I am working on a solution for this, but right now, if there is a PBIX file that is only a data set where there's no report attached to the front of it, I've kind of started calling them bare data sets, where you've published it as a data set and there's not meant to be a report attached to it because you're going to be making other reports that are called thin reports where they don't have their own data set. They connect live to a data set in the service. If that is the setup that you're using, this will actually not download the PBIX file for the data set if there isn't a corresponding report with the same name in the workspace. I'm working on a way to basically sort of use the same switcheroo method I did earlier, where sort of just create a new blank PBIX file in the workspace alongside that data set, link them, download the PBIX file, and then delete the file again. But that is a work in progress. And again, if anybody is feeling up to the challenge, I would love to help have some collaborators on this repository. So, all right, we'll finish with that. So we'll move on here, back to the presentation here. So, all right, bit of a palette cleanser here. A lot of organizations have a lot of their data on-prem, and you've got a daily process that refreshes your data warehouse, and it's an ETL. Sometimes maybe it happens overnight, maybe it happens first thing in the morning, maybe it happens at the end of the previous day, whatever. The thing is that, of course, sometimes it takes longer and sometimes it takes shorter. Sometimes it fails and has to restart. And the problem with Power BI is that Power BI doesn't know what's going on in your data warehouse. All it knows is here's the scheduled time that my data set is set to refresh. And if the data set tries to refresh the data too early, it either gets the previous day's data, or depending on what happened in the ETL process, it could be if all the data gets, if the tables get dropped and then re-added, it could be that it gets nothing if it refreshes at the wrong time. So this problem kind of plagued me for a while. I was going, I need a way so that for Power BI to just know when the ETL is done, so that it can go get the data dynamically at that time, whenever that happens to be, whether it's at midnight or 4 a.m. or 6 a.m. or whenever it's done. And so, fortunately, Power Automate has the ability to basically create a new REST API endpoint that triggers a flow in Power Automate when any process hits that endpoint and says, okay, go. So, and then of course, in ETL, if you have a SQL Server job on your server, you can actually add a PowerShell step in your ETL job, and it could just be the last step in your job that says, okay, once everything in this thing finishes, if it's finished successfully, run this PowerShell script, and the PowerShells can just say, okay, make a REST API call to that endpoint in Power Automate, and then Power Automate can say, okay, ETL's done, kick off the data flow refreshes, kick off the data set refreshes, what have you. So I'll show you real quick here. This is SSMS, and I've got a SQL Server agent job that I've set up called ETL. And in that is a step called launch data flow refresh in Power BI. And we look inside here, and this is just a PowerShell script here. And I'll actually show you the SQL script for that job. That's this guy here. So it does, okay, it's going to go and it says, this is basically the PowerShell command here. It runs this, and it says, okay, as soon as that job runs, it launches a PowerShell process, which this bit here is necessary to make sure that the version of PowerShell that the SQL agent runs, it has the level of encryption compatible with the Power Automate. So if you were just to run this all by yourself in a PowerShell window on your machine, it would work. But as soon as you try to run it in the job, it fails. So that's why you need this little step up here, this step. So yeah, so when this runs, it's going to go ahead and run that Power Automate flow, and the Power Automate flow will refresh my data flow. And then I can, of course, have other Power Automate flows that say when this data flow finishes refreshing, kick off the refreshes on the data sets downstream from that. So essentially, you can get away with not having anything scheduled at all in Power BI. Just have it refresh whenever it's ready. And so my organization, I've been able to get us from where we were refreshing at a much later time in the morning because we were never sure when ETL was going to finish. So we kind of had to just schedule everything for as late as we thought it would ever finish. And sometimes even then it still failed because occasionally ETL would take longer. And so by switching to this, we're able to get to where most of the refreshes happen earlier than they used to. And it's much more dependable because it only refreshes when it's actually ready to go. So I'll show you how this works. So real quick over in my browser here, this is my refresh data flow on REST API call. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to edit this flow and show you how this works. It's very, very simple. There's just one step at the beginning, which is the trigger, which is when an HTTP request is received. And what it gives you is, this is an HTTP post URL. So to get that URL, all you have to do is you go to the step and you just click this little copy button here. And then you just, in PowerShell, you phrase that as an invoke web request method post blah. And then everything that comes after this will run whenever you hit that API endpoint with your SQL job. So what this is doing is just going into the workspace called data flows, and then it's doing this AdventureWorks person. So I have my database on here. I have the AdventureWorks database on here, and I have this. My data flow is basically just the tables where it's person dot. So we go over to Power BI here. I'll go to my, oops, not that one. To my data flows here. So AdventureWorks.person. And we can see here's all these tables here. So what I'm going to do now is I'll say, all right, we're going to kind of simulate and pretend that my ETL job just finished, and we're going to basically tell this job to run. And there's really only one step in here, but we're going to pretend that there was a bunch of steps prior to this PowerShell part that actually did all of the SQL ETL process. And at the end, it's going to call this very last step, which is to launch the PowerShell. So I'm just going to tell it start job, and it's now executing the job. All right, success. Now I'm going to come over to here, and I'll go back out here and look at our run history. Here we go. 11 seconds ago, that Power Automate flow ran, and now over here in Power BI. I'm just going to refresh this page and see. Turns out there it is. It's refreshing. So there you go. Whenever you have anything that's on-prem that needs to be, the data on-prem needs to be part of your data sets in Power BI, you don't have to worry about what time of day your refresh is going to do. Just go, go in, add an additional step at the very end of your ETL process that launches a PowerShell process, calls the API in Power Automate, which then kicks off your refreshes in Power BI. All right. Questions about that at all?
No questions, although one comment saying that I absolutely need this.
Nice. All right. It's the whole point with Power Automate is that it's low code, no code. There's really almost no code at all to write for this. There's really just 2 lines of PowerShell, and as long as you know how to add a step to an ETL job in SQL Server, if you don't have permission, you may need help from your DBA to do that. But it's pretty straightforward. So and as soon as I started using this, I saw the reliability of report refreshes just go skyrocket. So I used to get report refresh failures all the time because there was something that was scheduled at a certain time of day, and the ETL wasn't done by a certain time, and now it never tries to refresh before it's done. So there's some ways that you can give your users a heads up about whether the data that they're looking at is fresh or not. And then I guess that would be something I'm working on a blog post for that. So if you're interested in learning more about that, like the idea of like a data freshness indicator in a report, to just give them an icon that says whether this data has refreshed as of today or not. That is a thing I'm already doing in my organization. And when I get the write-up done for that, it'll be on my blog. So if you're interested, subscribe to my blog. Using an RSS reader. I don't have an email subscription set up yet, so might have to get a little nerdy. So, all right. I guess let's move on here. That was the refresh Power BI data flow from a SQL Server job. We're now going to move on to PBI Tools Watch PS. Now, this is an external tool for Power BI Desktop that I wrote. I should say I wrote the external tool that shows up in the Power BI Desktop ribbon. And I guess, let's see here. I'll just open one of the files that I actually downloaded a moment ago. Oh, where is that? Let's see here. It should be here in Power BI Workspaces, and I'm just going to open one of these files here. I'll do this data set. So as I mentioned, when we were running that script earlier, it basically, as soon as it finishes downloading the PBIX file, it runs the PBI Tools.exe and basically extracts that PBIX file into its constituent source code and puts that in a folder next to it. But what if you're a report developer and you want to be able to save that source code while you're developing a report, or while you're developing the data set? Actually, this is the data set, and there's really almost nothing here. So real quick, I'm going to switch over to the report because I kind of want to show off how cool the ability to get the source code and see the differences between them. So okay. So come on, give me a report page. There we go. Here's a report page. So I have this tool called PBI Tools Watch. Really, all this is just it's just a JSON file that you can download from this same repository. It's under the external tools folder in my repository. And there's 2 different versions, one for PowerShell 5.1 and one for PowerShell 7. The one for 7 is not quite stable at the moment. So if you want something reliable, there's really nothing fancy. You don't need PowerShell 7 for this to work. So you might as well just install a PowerShell 5 version and use that. So what this is just a JSON file that basically launches PBI Tools in a PowerShell window, and automatically starts watching whatever file you have open in Power BI Desktop. And as soon as you save that file, then it automatically extracts the source code and puts it into the folder next to it. So if you already have source code in the folder next to it, it just overwrites whatever source code's already in there. And so as long as if you are making commits in your say you're using Azure DevOps, and you make your commits and you push every time you make a major change, or even multiple times in a session, every time you make a commit, it's just taking the files that you saved most recently, and then you, of course, you have the ability to look at the differences between what you saved previously and what you saved most recently. So this is just a bunch of complicated PowerShell stuff that basically says, okay, we're gonna go and grab the process ID for the for Power BI Desktop, and then it's going to go and find the file that you have open, and then start watching that file for any changes you save to it. So I'll show you what that looks like here. So we'll go over to Power BI Desktop, and I'm going to say, all right, I am running. I'll go ahead and launch this, and that will open in a PowerShell window. You can see it's PowerShell 5 because it's got this little blue icon here. So now it says extracting source code from file, and then it shows here's the folder and the file that has, and here we go. So now let's see if I can throw this in that window here, and then I'll throw this over here so you can, whoops, come on. So as soon as I save this file, whatever changes I make, it will actually save those changes into the source code. So I'll just say, all right, I'm going to resize this visual a little bit. Save. There it goes. And all right. So it looks like a lot of stuff that's been changed, and these are all separate files, right? And that's the reason for that is because basically, of course, there's like the filters that have been applied to a visual. There's any data transforms. There's the actual like DAX query for visuals. All that stuff is being saved in separate files, and so you'll oftentimes see a lot of separate files where almost nothing that seems like it's related to a change you've made is there. But this is one of the things that Matthias Tierbach, the author of the PBI Tools thing, is working on with Microsoft to try to make it so that it's a lot easier to be able to track the changes for something down to a specific place. So if you change a visual, only one file should be changed because everything about that visual should be contained in one JSON file in the source code. So that is a work in progress, and Matthias has been releasing new versions of PBI Tools, and of course, Microsoft is working on their own side of things using the what they call PowerBI desktop dev mode, using that .pbip files, more or less the same kind of thing, coming at it from two different angles. So right now, the PBI Tools will actually extract the data set as the new tabular model definition language, which is a little closer to like a YAML file, where it's more human readable than JSON. So you basically don't have any of your brackets. It's pretty much just tab delimited the way that, say, like Python is. So no brackets. You don't have to worry about all those like escapes because of all the quotes and everything. And apparently that is on the roadmap for things to do for the report side of things. So they want to come up with a similar standard for the report side, where there will be some sort of report definition language, something similar to the RDLs that we've had in the paginated reports and SSRS reports, where it's pretty much just just text inside this file. It's more or less easy to read for a human, and then you can actually see the changes made from one version to the next. So and I don't have all this in a Git repository right now, so I won't be able to show you, here, look, you can actually see the changes between this version and that version. But if we did have this in a Git repository, you would be able to see, here's what was changed from this file and that file from one to the next. So we can actually look in here. Let's go to the dataset one, because I want to show you what the dataset looks like. So we'll go to the model here, and we'll look at the, let's open this with VS Code. And look at that. I'm pretty sure, yeah, there is a, I thought there was one for, I know that they've got a VS Code extension for working with this stuff. It might still be that it's in preview or something like that. Maybe that's not why it's not showing up. But basically, as you can see, it's tab delimited like a YAML file here. We don't have all of that ugly, kind of JSON style brackets and escapes and that sort of stuff. It's much easier to read this kind of thing. And so, well, let's see here. Why don't we look at some other files here? We'll look at the expressions and see what this says. Here we go. So expressions, this is basically your M code, right? wouldn't it be great to be able to like take the M code for like a certain set of tables from one data set and actually just copy the code and paste it into another file? One of the nice things about PBI Tools is that it not only can it deconstruct a PBIX file into the source code, it can actually do it in reverse. It can take the source code and turn it into a PBIT file, which is a PowerBI template file. And so if you've got source code for one file, but you want to add some features or functionality or maybe just tables that are in another one, and you don't want to have to do it all manually, you can actually use this to grab the parts that you want, copy paste the code into your other source code, and then when you use PBI Tools to basically compile that source code back into a file, into a Power BI desktop file, you can open Power BI desktop, and there you go. You can publish it from there. Save it as a PBIX if you want to, all that stuff. So again, this is that same markup language where it's really just using tabs to get the differences between each one. You notice there's not a bunch of like new lines. If you ever look at the source code from like if you ever download a data flow JSON file, and you look at all the M queries, it's just littered with escapes for all the new lines and all that kind of stuff. And so this is a much cleaner way of representing, and actually this is all valid M code. I could actually just take this here, I could copy it from here and go paste it into the advanced editor and Power Query and Power BI desktop, and it would work fine. There's no like it's all of it is exactly how it should be. So anyway, this is stuff that you'd be able to commit in your source control, and if somebody changed something, you'd be able to see exactly what was changed, because if it was just one character, it would show you a little like red over that character on one side and green on that character on the other side, so you could see the diff between one and the other. All right, so that's that. Why don't we? All right. And so when I'm done with this, I basically close Power BI Desktop, and then when you close Power BI Desktop, the PowerShell says, "Oh, okay, Power BI Desktop session is ended," so it stops watch mode, and you can just close this window. All right. So that's how that works. I highly encourage anyone who uses PBIX files in their, even if it's just you, even if you're the only report developer in your organization, having your reports in source control means you can always look at previous versions that you had before, and if you need to, you have some regression, something happens where it's like, oh my gosh, something broke, and I don't know when it broke, or about when it broke, but you don't know what you changed that made it break. Having this version history in a proper version control system means you can go back and see what was changed on a certain date. And if it's a team of people, you can see even who changed it. And if you're doing a good job as a team and you're actually putting good commit comments, and you can see why they changed it. So I highly encourage you to try to use a good version control system for your reports. Now that we have the ability to actually get the source code out of the PBIX files, we're not just committing big old binary files into our repositories. It's much easier to see what was changed by whom and for why, and then of course you can do things like say, all right, we're going to take changes from this file that someone was working on over here, and we're going to actually take those changes that they were working on, and then we're going to merge those changes with the changes this other person was making on the same file at the same time. That's one thing that you can't do with Power BI Desktop. If two people are working on the same file, you can't merge their changes together. But if you look at the source code, you can find what's different between them and merge them together. So yeah, if you haven't tried that stuff out yet, I definitely encourage you to give it a try. So let's see here. We're actually rolling up to the very end of our time here. So that was the PBI Tools Watch PS. And we have one more thing, which is export Power BI Workspace Security, which is basically the ability to audit your Power BI tenant and get a list of who has access to what in your tenant. This is actually a pretty quick one, so we'll go ahead and do this real quick. So I'm going to go over here and do export. Oops. Power BI Workspace Security. Oops. Come on. Workspace Security. There we go. And then it looks like I don't have any parameters for this one. I'm just going to run it by itself. Before I do that, let me show you the code. For Power BI Workspace Security. So again, pretty much the same stuff as before. This is actually using a module called Import Excel. It's a bit deceiving because it doesn't only import from Excel, it also exports to Excel. This is an incredibly powerful library. It's so powerful that you don't even need Excel installed on the machine where you run this script. It can generate valid Excel files with filters with conditional formatting, all that kind of stuff, without even having Excel installed on the machine. And so it's great for servers. So pretty much all this stuff is very similar to what we were looking at previous ones. It's getting the workspaces. It's gonna and then it's gonna loop through all of them, and it's gonna take the information that it finds in there, and it's gonna output that to an Excel file. I have this little bit of code here that you can uncomment if you need to. If you start hitting rate limits, you can uncomment that and basically tell it to kind of wait in between each API call a little bit to make sure that it spaces it out enough. One of the things I want to do with all of these scripts is implement something similar to what Rui Romano has done with his PBI monitor PowerShell scripts, which actually handles the 429 too many requests response, and basically only pauses when it receives that response from the REST API, and then continues at a pace that it can continue running whenever a new sort of slot opens up. So again, this is right now is a one-man project. I haven't had anybody contribute code besides myself to this. So if this stuff interests you and you'd like to see that kind of feature become available, I would love to collaborate. So finally, I guess this is the stuff at the end here. Was taking the output, and then these are the parameters you can actually pass to the export Excel. This is the commandlet export Excel, which is part of the import Excel module. So again, a little bit confusing with the naming there, but we're basically taking the parameters here and saying, okay, we're going to show, and we're going to clear the sheet, and it's going to put auto filter. Basically, every column is going to have the little arrow that you can do at the top of the column to be able to filter. It'll make it basically a nice Excel file rather than being more like a CSV. It does auto size, so basically whatever width the columns need to be able to contain the text that's inside them, it automatically sizes it there. It freezes the top row. So I thought I closed all my communication apps. Every time when you scroll down the page, it will keep that row or like the column headers at the top of the page, so you can see the column header names as you scroll further down. And then it, of course, makes them bold. So, and then it uses this as a thing, basically putting the parameters in this variable, and then basically specifying them at the end. Here is called parameter splatting. I didn't make up that term. It's a PowerShell thing. So it's kind of nice because you can specify all the parameters in one spot, and it's a lot cleaner to do it this way than to have to put all those parameters all down here in line. So anyway, so we'll look and we'll see what that does here. So we are currently in the PowerShell folder in here. So when this Excel file exports, is actually just going to end up right in here along with everything else. So that's all right though. It's going to go grab the XS token. It fortunately was able to get it. There it goes, getting result here, and now it's opening in Excel. That was quick. Here we go. So here's the workspace ID, workspace name, email address of the user, and then the user role, and then what their user type is. Of course, if there's, like if you have service accounts, those like service principals, those might show up differently. Or I guess Active Directory security groups would show up as a group, I believe. So, and of course, like I said, the ability, we can say, all right, I'm gonna, I want to only show certain workspaces here, so I'm going to do just those two, like that. Or the ability to, I want to only see the ones where someone is an administrator, because I want to make sure that we don't have a bunch of people in our organization who are admins who don't need to be. There we go. There's a list of just the administrators. So, and then this file, you can basically, it saves it as PowerBI Workspace Security Audit, and then it puts the date at the end of the file. So, you can run this script over and over again. And in fact, I think this is actually, this actually puts the date and the time of day. So you could run this however often, and as long as you have enough storage space for the files, it'll just keep dumping them in there sequentially for you. So that's that. I'm gonna not save that file. Let's see. Back to my repo here. Questions from anyone here? I don't know where that file went. Maybe it saved it in the temp folder.
No questions. Although you're going to have at least one person reach out to you afterwards, it sounds like.
Okay, awesome. Good deal. Where did that output file go? Let's see here. It probably dropped it in. Yes, it did put it in the temp folder. There we go. That's why it wasn't in there. So that's good, I guess. But again, like if you want to, you can actually, I guess if you wanted to put it in a specific folder, you probably have to go in and add a parameter in here and tell it you wanted to drop it in a specific place. So right now, this is not ideal for an automated process, but of course, because it requires an interactive login anyway, it's probably not ideal for that purpose or for that reason as well. Another thing that I'm hoping to do with this is add the ability to basically use the Azure Key Vault and create a service principal where the credentials, or I guess you could say like the client secret and client ID, client key, that sort of thing, are saved in like a JSON file. And then when you run that script, it doesn't even have to log in. And then of course, you can have that set to that those credentials have to be replaced every 3 months or what have you. So and it's nice when you create service principals, you can basically really sculpt the amount of access that they have. So you can basically say the only thing that this thing can even do is just output data, or like metadata. You can say it can't download it can't export data from the Power BI reports or data sets. All it can do is just see the workspace permissions, that sort of thing. So if you want to go that route, it's a great way to make sure that your automated processes aren't using any sort of account that could potentially wreak havoc if the credentials for it fell into the wrong hands. So again, that's something I'm hoping to add as a feature to this, but it is not currently able to do that right now. So all this stuff right now is pretty much just attended only mode, or at least you kind of have to start it, and then you can walk away and go get a coffee break and come back later. But yeah. All right, so I think that's the end of stuff that I had to hear. Yeah, so we're now on to the Q&A session. Anybody want to have any questions or ideas for ways that you could see this going in the future? I'm kind of bummed that some of the stuff broke during my demo here. I was really hoping that this wouldn't cause issues, but I guess probably serves me right for letting my VM license expire. So again, totally open for questions. Even if it isn't a question at all about PowerShell or Power BI, you can ask me about my favorite type of tea, or or if you want to talk about running a user group, I actually run the Iowa Power BI user group. So if anybody wants to talk about that kind of stuff, I'm totally an open book.
Chat, this is your opportunity to jump in. One quick question, because I think it's going to come up. I see the .github folder. Is there a Git repo for the PowerShell scripts today, or?
Yeah, so the Git repo, I think I showed it in my browser earlier, but I'll go back and show you again. So this is my profile is James D. Bartlett III. The repo we're looking in is pinned on my profile. It's called PowerBits. And inside this folder, there's a bunch of stuff in here. So I've got demo files, a couple different, like this is a demo file for a user group meeting I had a while ago. We've got the external tools. So these are the PBI tool.json files you need if you wanted to install that that special tool that extracts the Power BI desktop files in real time while you save them. As I said before, the instructions for getting that running are on my website. If you go to my blog, there's an article called PBI Tools Watch PS Extract and Save Your Power BI Desktop Source Code with a single click. And all the instructions for installing that and like how it works and that kind of stuff are all here. And it just puts that little icon there on your Power BI desktop. And then so that's the external tools. I have a miscellaneous folder. Here's that blank PBIX file that we were using earlier. That's where it downloads it from. These are the files for the Power BI admin in a day. So if anybody wants to run that, it took me a long time to find those files a while ago because they were behind some like Microsoft Gold Partners Only link, and so I ended up finding them somewhere. I was like, I'm gonna save those so that I never have to try to scrounge them up again. This is the latest version of Power BI version control, which is a SharePoint and Power Apps based solution for version control. So if users in your organization are keen to get into some sort of version history for their Power BI files, but they're not comfortable with using Git, they don't want to ever do anything with command line, and they never want to see source code ever. This solution basically sets up a Power App and then connects to a SharePoint folder. and then uses SharePoint's built-in check-in, check-out features to basically lock a file to a given user on a team. So if one person has it open, nobody else can check it out. And as soon as that person checks it back in, it becomes available for someone else to check out, make their changes locally, check it back in. And of course, with SharePoint, one of the nice things is if you set it up right, those files in that SharePoint folder can actually be synchronized to Power BI. So that as soon as you check that file back in SharePoint, then whatever changes you've made to that report also get published to Power BI web service. So that there's a source code for that. Like I said, that's the latest version of that. I released that with Power BI Steve and Anthony. Oh gosh, I'm spacing his last name. Escobedo. Steve Campbell and Anthony Escobedo are the co-authors of that. They actually were the original authors of the app, and my latest contributions was just helping them squash a bug in the latest version, and hoping to do some more stuff with that in the future as well. So all the PowerShell stuff we've been working on here is inside this PowerShell folder. The stuff having to do with the Enterprise Data Gateway for like upgrading to the latest version of Enterprise Data Gateway, that script is here. Again, make sure that you copy this folder to your C drive if you're going to use it. So like go into the GitHub or the Git repository after you've cloned it, copy from here, and then paste it into the root of your C drive like I've got over here. And then again, go to the upgrade Enterprise Data Gateway link, and then go to properties and go to the compatibility tab and make sure that the run this program as administrator is checked. Otherwise, when that script reaches the point where or I guess when you run this thing, you want it to actually run the PowerShell script as administrator, because it needs to be in order to install the latest version. So all right, and so that's the Enterprise Data Gateway stuff. Another thing is, if you're going to try to run any of these things, these are all PowerShell functions. So if you try to run it as a script, nothing will happen. These are basically, it declares it as a function at the beginning here, and then at the end, you'll notice that there's just this, here's the ending bracket. So when you run this script, all it does is it makes that function available in your, as like a function that you can run as if it were a commandlet. So that's why I have this import PS hacks for Power BI functions file here, because what this does is it basically dot sources whatever files or whatever script or functions, and it makes those functions available in the current session. And so if you're using VS Code, you can, if you have this file open, you can just hit the play button here, and then when that little integrated terminal opens up, it will then those functions will become available in that session. Otherwise, if you're using a terminal window all by itself, you have to basically do dot and then dot / import PS hacks for PowerShell functions, and then that's what it does, and imports those function names, and then you can call them by their names. So I'm kind of torn on whether I want to basically just refactor those as just plain scripts, so that you can just run it as .ps1 without having to dot source them first. But I'm also thinking about trying to make this into an honest to goodness PowerShell module that you can install from the oh gosh, what's that thing called? There's like when you install a PowerShell module, if you were to do install module and then do gallery. Like, say for instance, the gallery, thank you. The community gallery. It's not an official Microsoft thing. It's not like the Microsoft Store. It's basically like kind of loosely hooked up to the source code of wherever people have their stuff, and then when they release a new version on GitHub, it kind of like copies it into the gallery. So yeah, I'm considering putting these into an actual PowerShell module, so that when you want access to all this stuff, all you have to do is install the module, and then you get all of those command lists right there on your command line. You never even have to use the .ps1 stuff. You just run them as if they were commands by themselves. So I'm kind of I have of dual minds on that process right now, because it'd be nice to be able to run them as a script, but also I'm hoping to turn this into a more mature and more professional grade kind of thing too. So of course it might be worth trying to kind of split it into two things and have the script versions and the function versions, but then that's just of course more source code to maintain. So again, I'm very eager to bring on collaborators. Anybody who's interested in enhancing the functionality or diversifying the ways that this code would work, I'd love to work with you. So that was that folder there. There's also a couple of template files in here. The matrix, that's kind of a fun one. Over here in the black workspace here. I don't know if you knew this, but you can actually throw fun like background stuff in your Power BI reports. So if you want to have some interesting kind of stuff going on, probably not a good like best practice as far as like making reports easy to read and not distracting. But occasionally you might have a client who's like really obsessed with things being sparkly or whatever, and wants it animations or things. This is basically just using an HTML iframe, and it's calling out to a repo on GitHub that has this animation, and so I have a special version of it where it's dimmed. So if you wanted to put some stuff on here, so it would be a little bit less distracting. Anyway, there's a template file for that is in the repo as well. And let's see what else is there. This is another thing I'm working on here. This is basically the ability to make it so that when you're on the Power BI service, you may have noticed most of the time it just says Power BI. No matter what page you're on, no matter what whatever workspace you're in, it never tells you what workspace you're in, or if you're looking at a pipeline or whatever. So I'm actually working on a user script which actually runs in your in a browser extension for the ability to basically automatically rename the tabs of whatever you have open. So you could basically have a list of here's all of the various different workspaces that I want, and if I'm in that workspace, I want the tab to be renamed to whatever that is. So this is just something I've been screwing around with in my spare time, and it works works okay. I want to make that better as well, but if anybody wants to help out with that, again, I'd love to collaborate. So that is all the files in that repository. So and of course, reach out to me if you have any questions about any of that stuff.
All right, and there are a couple of questions in chat. So the first one here is: are there any good books for getting familiar with PowerShell and Power BI, or
that is a
what would be a
great
good way to
question? Let me grab. I think probably my favorite is so Manning textbooks. They do a great job. When you purchase a book through Manning, you get the DRM-free EPUB or whatever version you want. Of course, you can also get it in print if you prefer print. This is a great book if you want to learn PowerShell, just the PowerShell and PowerShell scripting. This doesn't have anything with Power BI in it, but this will help you get familiar with things like parameters and splatting, like I was talking about earlier, and just the general syntax for a PowerShell. This is a great book, and I love the way that it's formatted because it's kind of structured in a way so that you can spend about an hour each day for a month. So take your lunch break while you're chowing down, kind of read through the chapter, ingest while you ingest, and then after about a month, you'll kind of have a better understanding of Power BI of PowerShell. And if you've been, especially if you've been doing, kind of like working along with it and actually trying out the stuff as you go along, then you'll be up to probably about where I am now in terms of PowerShell skill. I every time I read a book, I pretty much forget like 80% of it. So I think if anybody who has even a passing ability to remember what they read in a book will get a lot more out of this than I did. But it's a very mature book. It has it's probably some of the best content I've seen on PowerShell. There are other ones that are more specifically for PowerShell scripting or for PowerShell like system administration, that kind of stuff. But this I think is a good overall like newbies text. And Don Jones is like a legend in the PowerShell world, and so I definitely recommend this book. So there are others though. If you're on the Manning site and you go PowerShell, there are plenty of other ones here. So there are ones that are specifically for Azure, WMI, which is basically like, again, it's like system admin and stuff. But some of these things you look at the dates on, it's like I'm pretty sure that's probably not relevant anymore. But here we go: practical automation with PowerShell, effective scripting from the console to the cloud. That's relatively new. Oh, look at this: PowerShell scripting in a month of lunch is second edition. Oh, that's cool. Oh, it's still in. So this is a thing that Manning does. This MEAP, this is basically like an early access program. So if you want the book, you can go ahead and buy it, and then you can start reading the chapters that are available now. And then over time, as new chapters get added, they let you know there's more chapters. And eventually, once the book is finally released, then you can just download the latest version at the end. But it's a great way to be able to start reading a book before it's actually finished. As long as you want to start reading at the beginning. So again, great way to buy books. This is where I buy most of my tech books. So other questions?
Yeah, one more question before we wrap things up. This is much more of a high-level question, but do you have any general guidance around speeding up Power BI? So the context is a person who's fairly new to working with Power BI and just doesn't know what kinds of levers to pull or what things to look at for performance.
Sure. Well, so there is a qualifying question, or I guess a question back I would have the person who asked this question is in which context. So do you want to improve the performance of Power BI reports while you're working on them in Power BI Desktop? Do you want to improve them the performance of DAX measures when they're being evaluated in the service? Do you want to improve the performance of Power Query as it goes and gets data from your SQL server in import mode? Are you talking about direct query? There's so many different. When we talk about Power BI performance, there's those are just the ones I could think of off the top of my head of different ways we could talk about Power BI performance. And so every one of those things has a completely different approach to optimizing performance. And some of them I know quite a bit about, and other ones I know almost nothing. So it really depends on what type of performance you're talking about that you need to try to improve.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. So we'll see if we can get an answer briefly before we wrap things up. Not how to write it, but how to support it in an environment with Azure.
Was that the clarification?
That was the clarification, yeah.
Not how to write it, but how to support it in Azure. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't understand the question.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
So you're talking about in Azure, meaning like the data is stored in an Azure SQL server? Is that?
It looks like he'll reach out to you later.
Okay. All right, that sounds good.
Put together.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. On if you want to, you can open issues on my GitHub repo. You can also hit me up on Mastodon. Any of the above.
All right. Well, it looks like we are now out of questions. So thank you so much, James, for showing off some of these power bits.
Absolutely.
Very nice demos.
Happy to do that, and I'm glad that we're able to do this. And I hope that anybody who has any questions, or if they feel like contributing at all, feel free to reach out to me. Or even if you just want to talk shop, I'm pretty much always willing to banter with people on Power BI, PowerShell. Pretty much anything in the Microsoft data platform. All right.
Excellent. Thank you again. And this is going to be the could you put up the contact info one more time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Totally forgot. That was my closing slide here. So yeah, there's my website, datavolume.xyz. That's my blog. And I put new articles up there. I try to do it every month or so. And you can find me on LinkedIn, GitHub, and Mastodon at James D. Bartlett III.
All right. And with that, we are going to wrap things up for this evening. So for everybody who's still around at the end, thank you. Thank you, James, for the great presentation. And we'll be back again next month. 3 more sessions, 3 more weeks. But until we see each other in the next episode or whenever, everyone, take care.